So look at Anthony Ryder from South Lyon, Michigan, recently selected as the Lions 2020 Fan of the Year. He has a passion about sports broadcasting.
With the 112th selection in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Detroit Lions select Amon-Ra St. Brown, wide receiver, USC. One pride, baby! Yeah! What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another Detroit Lions video. Now, the Detroit Lions are, of course, a very good football team, right? A lot of people have high expectations for the Detroit Lions, and a lot of people this offseason are talking about Amon-Ra St. Brown. They're talking about Jared Goff. They're talking about Aiden Hutchinson or some of the other big-name defenders or offensive players on the Detroit Lions roster. However, the Detroit Lions are a team that have quite a few underrated players. A lot of guys that are productive, a lot of guys that are even starters and playmakers for the Detroit Lions that continue to fly under the radar, even by some Lions fans that many people don't give the recognition nor the credit that they deserve. So today I wanted to take a look at the Detroit Lions' most underrated players, single out 4 guys that continue to make plays, that continue to be great playmakers for the Detroit Lions and continue to impact the Detroit Lions in big ways, but never quite get the recognition that they deserve. Now, starting off with the first player on this list, I want to take a look at James Houston. Now, James Houston, he was a 6th round selection out of Jackson State University. He was a player that was cut before week 1, a player that didn't make his NFL debut until week 11 on Thanksgiving Day versus the Buffalo Bills. And for those reasons, many people can't get past those facts and can't see James Houston for the elite pass rusher that he was a season ago, right? In the same way that most first round picks get a second or even third chance, and even if they're 7 or 8 years into their NFL career and have never boomed, many people look back to their draft status, right? Many people look back to their draft stock and say, well, they were a first round pick for a reason, right? They were a player that was selected top 32 for a reason in their respective draft class. Clearly, they have the talent. They just haven't put it together yet. Many people look at late round picks in the same way, right? Many people look at it, well, yeah, he was really good, but he was a late round pick, right? He can't be that good. There must be, some fluke. There must be some reason that, he was overly productive and probably won't replicate it again, because if he could, he wouldn't have been a 6th round selection, when in most cases that just isn't true, right? Most cases when a player is good in the NFL, they're just good in the NFL. It doesn't matter what their draft status was anymore after their first season. They're either good or they're not good. They're either really good now or they have the potential to develop to be great. But really, after the first game you've played in the NFL and really your first season, your draft status does not matter anymore. And James Houston proved that. In his first game, his week 11 debut versus the Buffalo Bills, James Houston played just 5 defensive snaps. On those 5 defensive snaps, James Houston had 2 sacks, 2 tackles for loss, as well as a fumble recovery, and then continued to show that that was not a fluke by playing the rest of the 7 games of his NFL career so far, the rest of the 7 games in his rookie season, totaling 8 sacks, 7 tackles for loss, a forced fumble, and a fumble recovery, while being the best pass rusher on the Detroit Lions front 4. And yes, I know Aiden Hutchinson was there and he is who gets talked about. I know that John Kaminsky gets talked about a lot. I know that there are people high on Josh Pascal and there are people that are excited for Romeo Okwara to come back, and all these other pass rushers getting recognition, getting their name out there, getting their name talked about. And yet the best pass rusher, the most efficient pass rusher, the most dangerous pass rusher on the Detroit Lions roster very rarely gets talked about by the media, very rarely gets talked about as one of the best pass rushers from the rookie class, let alone one of the most efficient pass rushers in the NFL. And if you look at James Houston by the numbers, in the last 2 months of the NFL season, there was not a better pass rusher or a better edge rusher than James Houston in the entirety of the NFL. Oh, and by the way, in those 7 games, in his 8 sacks, 13 pressures, he did that while playing just 140 defensive snaps on the Detroit Lions across those 7 games. That is incredible production. that is incredible efficiency and a player that needs to be talked about more by the media and even Lions fans, because not only is James Houston a great rotational piece, James Houston has the potential to be a top 10 pass rusher in the entirety of the NFL. Now, sticking on the defensive side of the ball, I want to talk about Alex Anzalone, a team captain, a 2021 free agent acquisition that most people think about as a very poor linebacker. A lot of people, and most Lions fans even to this day, believe Alex Anzalone is a below average linebacker, that he's not worthy of being, getting this new contract extension. He's not worthy of really being a starter on the defense. And yet, Alex Anzalone has been incredibly productive over his 2 seasons in Detroit. He's been a team captain both seasons he's been in Detroit and has been very productive, despite the fact that in 2021 he did have a very high missed tackle rate. And that's what most people cling to when saying Alex Anzalone isn't very good, right? They cling to that 2021 statistic of 16.1% of his tackle attempts were missed. That is a very high mark. That is not a very good tackle percentage. And the most people had a good reason in 2021 to say Alex Anzalone, probably not the future, probably not a starting caliber linebacker, probably need to move on, draft his replacement, and move on and improve the roster. But they failed to look at 2022 when Alex Anzalone dropped that mark to just 7.4% of missed tackles rate, which is below league average, believe it or not, while making 125 tackles on the season, were 7 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks, a forced fumble, a fumble recovery, an interception, as well as a passive defendant. People failed to realize that he improved drastically in his second year in Detroit, in his second year under Aaron Glenn's defensive coordinator, and people failed to realize that Alex Anzalone was more productive than Levante David, more productive than former All-Pro Devin White, more productive than Tremaine Edmonds, who got a massive contract this offseason, and Alex Anzalone's value is significantly better, and nobody wants to acknowledge the fact that, yeah, Alex Anzalone was not very good in 2021, but got really good in 2022. People fail to change their minds and say, okay, he improved. He got significantly better. He is a really good linebacker in the NFL. He flies around the field, gives 110% effort on every play, can do pass coverage, can do run support, is a quick sideline to sideline linebacker. And despite not having, I'd say, any elite traits, Alex Anzalone is the lifeblood of this defense. He has been for the last couple of years, and he has improved drastically since he first got to Detroit to the time where he signed his new contract and the time that he is 2023, where Alex Anzalone hopefully will stay at this caliber of linebacker that he was last year, with more help and more of a surrounding and supporting cast around him. Now, moving over to the offensive side of the ball, I want to take a look at who I believe is the most underrated player on the Detroit Lions roster, a player that is a great separator, a player that was brought in as a 2021 free agent acquisition, and since day one has done nothing but produce yards, produce scores, produce big plays, and been an underrated player on the Detroit Lions offense. That player, of course, is going to be Khalif Raymond, who in 2021, the year he became a Detroit Lion, was third on the team in receiving yards behind just TJ Hawkinson and Amon-Ra St. Brown. And then when TJ Hawkinson left, he became the second leading receiver on the Detroit Lions last year, with over 600 yards and being a big play threat and being the Detroit Lions' go-to guy on a lot of the deep shots and a lot of the big plays, while DJ Chark and Jameson Williams were out. Now, Khalif Raymond is an elite separator. I will show you a chart in a minute after this. I will show you a chart in just a few minutes showing exactly how good of a separator Khalif Raymond was in 2022. And on top of being an elite separator, he is top tier speed. And on top of that, even, he had 0 drops in the 2022 season. Oh, and by the way, he was a second team All-Pro while being a great kick returner as well. So he's a great route runner, a great separator, a phenomenal wide receiver with top tier speed, solid hands, a great kick and punt returner, and yet nobody talks about Khalif Raymond being a good wide receiver in the NFL. We talk about Marvin Jones. We talk about Amon-Ra St. Brown. We talk about Josh Reynolds. We talk about Jameson Williams. We talk about Khalif Raymond as if he is an afterthought to this Detroit Lions offense, despite him being a top 3 weapon in the Detroit Lions offense for back-to-back seasons, and likely having a huge role in the 2023 season with the suspension of Jameson Williams, with the lack of any other deep threat. Khalif Raymond might even produce more next year than he has the last 2 seasons for the Detroit Lions. Now, I mentioned the separation chart. This is a separation chart of a lot of wide receivers in the NFL. As you can see, a PFF's wide receiver separation versus man and zone with a minimum of 300 routes to run. Now, I do apologize for the poor quality. This is the best image I could find of it, but I think it displays my point very, very well. And that is the point that you see, obviously, on the bottom, on the horizontal line, that is your separation versus man, and your vertical is your separation versus zone. You have DJ Chark and you have Josh Reynolds, kind of really good versus zone, not very good versus man. You have Amon-Ra St. Brown, who's great against man and kind of average against zone. You have guys like Justin Jefferson, Chris Olave, Stephon Diggs, Jerry Jeudy, who are very, very good against both. And then in the very top, you have Khalif Raymond, who is elite not only versus man coverage, but elite versus zone coverage as well. And on top, again, of all of this, he had 0 drops in the 2022 NFL season. Khalif Raymond is the most underrated player, not only on the Detroit Lions, but potentially the most underrated player in the entire NFL, and nobody knows his name. Right? This is a guy that blows Justin Jefferson out of the water, blows Chris Olave out of the water, blows Stephon Diggs and Jerry Jeudy and Amari Cooper and Garrett Wilson and Tyreek Hill out of the water in separation numbers. And yet he's never talked about as an elite route runner. He's never talked about as a big playmaker. And despite only being a great route runner and playmaker in all pro since joining the Detroit Lions, he never, ever gets his recognition. And again, I think he is the most underrated player on the Detroit Lions roster. But he is not the last player we will be talking about today, as Taylor Decker, a player that doesn't get any recognition from Detroit Lions fans, doesn't get any recognition from the NFL media, despite being a phenomenal, I would argue, elite top 10 offensive tackle in the NFL over the last couple of seasons, is a player that is severely underrated. Now, the Lions offensive line is, of course, a great one, right? As a top 3, maybe even top 1 offensive line in all of football. But the players that get talked about on this offensive line are Penei Sewell, the most recent first-round pick, most recent Pro Bowler, and a guy that you're going to build your future around, right? Jonah Jackson, a former Pro Bowler from the 2021 season that continues to be a top offensive guard in the NFL. And of course, Frank Ragnow, a former All-Pro and, of course, recent Pro Bowler that is one of the best, if not the best center in the NFL in competition, of course, with Creed Humphrey as well as Jason Kelce, but a player that never gets talked about. A player on the offensive line that hasn't made a Pro Bowl despite being statistically one of the best tackles in the NFL, and a player that never ever gets talked about as a top tier tackle is Taylor Decker, who in the last couple of years has been, again, a top 5, if not top 10, a top 10, if not top 5 offensive tackle in the league, as last season he only allowed 4 sacks in over 1,100 snaps. In 2021, allowed just 2 sacks. In 2020, allowed just 2 sacks. In 2018, allowed just 2 sacks. And in 2017, allowed just 3 sacks. Now, he did have a down year in 2019 and did have a few struggles as a rookie, but other than those 2 seasons, he has been a top tier offensive tackle while playing the premier position on the offensive line and doing it at a significantly better level than most NFL tackles around the league, right? We have come to expect Taylor Decker to be phenomenal, right? And a lot of people talk about Taylor Decker as, oh, he's a good offensive tackle. Like, he's above average. He's really, really good. But we failed to realize that he is, by the numbers, one of the top 10 offensive tackles in the NFL. He is one of the best left tackles in the NFL right now. And most people just look at him as an average tackle because Penei Sewell's flashy. Jonah Jackson and Frank Ragnow are all pros and Pro Bowlers. They get far more recognition despite Taylor Decker, again, by the numbers, being the best tackle on the team and a top 2 offensive lineman on the Detroit Lions top 5 offensive line. So I wanted to give him his credit. He very much deserved it. He's been a very, very good offensive tackle for a very long time, and nobody seems to know Taylor Decker is one of the best offensive linemen, if not the best tackle on the Detroit Lions top 5 offensive line. So with that being said, that is all for you guys today. Those are my top 4 underrated players on the Detroit Lions. Players that, of course, you likely know about, players that you likely even are high on, but players that just continuously by the media, by some Lions fans, and even by the rest of the NFL are continuously underrated and never ever talked about or given credit. And that's what I wanted to do today. So with all that being said, that is all I have for you guys today. Let me know down in the comments below how you feel about these 4 players in particular. And of course, let me know any other players that are continuing to be underrated. Let me know any players that you think don't get enough attention, don't get talked about enough. And of course, just your underrated players for the Detroit Lions. I'd be very curious what you guys have to say. But with all that being said, that's all I got for you guys today. If you did enjoy the video and you're still sticking around, please make sure you get down below, subscribe to the channel, and like the video. It helps us out a ton. But with all that being said, that's all I got for you guys right now. Thank you all so much for watching. And until next time, and as always, go Lions!